Nobody knows even why some houses are called haunted.
What would you call this place?
Well, diseased, sick, crazy, sure. Such houses are described in the Bible as lepers. Before that, in Homer's race for the underworld, a house of Hades.
Hi everybody, this is Irene from Paranormal UK Radio Show, flagship show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And with me tonight are a host of hosts. So, host of hosts, or I don't know whether a gabble of hosts or what, but host of hosts, that's the only way I can describe them. They're all my radio hosts and from the network, and I'm pleased to say here they are. First, my co-host is Christian Delaney.
Hello, Irene. How are you?
Hello, sweetie. And then from the Peep Show, everybody, the Peep Show, which we'll talk about later on. We have Neil Geddies Ward.
Hello. Good evening, everyone.
Hello, Neil. Hiya.
Hiya.
And from Paranormal Dimensions, I've got that right, haven't I? David Young.
Yeah, David Young. That's it. Hello, everybody out there.
Oh, yeah. Right, so who's going to start? What sort of, the weather? Let's face it. You know, I'm instead of just talking to my co-hosts now on the introduction, I'm talking to all my hosts. So it feels strange. It does feel strange. Because how many hosts have we got on the Paranormal UK network? We've got 29, 31 hosts.
Yeah, that's quite a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can't have you all on together because it'll just blow the system, wouldn't it?
It'd be a laugh, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Oh, we've done about, I think, David, I think at the most we've had about 8 people on in the Paranormal Pub. Neil, do you remember Paranormal
I do
Pub?
remember the flavour of the crisps, the coach going by, the cobbled streets. It was really good.
Yeah, the old cock and balls.
That's it.
Yeah, we must go back down to the old cock and balls and do a show again one day because, you know, it was fun. It was fun. Who was it who was always getting drunk? Well, was it Monkey?
He was quite vocal. He wasn't buying the drinks as much, but he was
No, he was never buying the drinks, was he? Always kept his hand in his pocket, but, you know... That's Monkey for you.
Well, I just hope the cock and ball hasn't been turned into a harvester or something, you know.
Oh, no. Disaster. You know, the old Cock and Balls is a traditional old British inn. I think it was 1700 and something.
And presumably haunted, I presume.
Yes, haunted. And there is a ghostly horse that trots back and forwards outside the old Cock and Balls. If you remember, and if you listen, and I used to always say this to people, you listen to one of the shows that was recorded in a Cock and Balls, you can hear the clunk, clunk, clunk of the hooves outside.
Yeah.
And then a little while later, you'll hear the clunk, clunk, clunk of the hooves again. So he's quite a busy little horse. and the Cock and Balls was well haunted. I can't remember what it was that was haunting there now, but you know, I loved that place, didn't you, Neil?
Oh, it was an excellent atmosphere. I mean, you know, you'd come in and everyone would be seated around the table, and you wasn't sure whether you're getting served by a real live bar person or maybe a former resident of the bar. Depending on how the drink was, you know, was it a full spirit or was it a pint, you know? And also how much money they're willing to accept, a penny or a shilling or a fiver, you know?
Yeah. Well, this is it. When it was a penny and a shilling or for a round, we knew then we weren't talking to anybody that was walking behind that bar, but more floating behind the bar.
Yeah.
Mm. And there would be the one that would want the crisps.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Or pork scratchings. Every time we order, do you remember?
Yeah.
We'd do. Sorry about pickles, people. I have put a cover over the old devil, but he's. I wish it was dark outside. I'd turn the lights off. But where was I? Yeah. Every time we ordered a round of drinks, someone would shout out, "Brad, get the crisps in. Get the pork scratchings." Yeah, it was quite funny. But that's what it used to be like, Christian. And like I said, I think we will make another visit down there. What do you think, Neil?
I think it's a great idea. Great idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as you don't get clobbered over the head and end up rowing a boat in the high seas.
Yeah.
Like they used to do.
So
Yes.
hopefully those days are gone.
Yeah. You can apply via the internet now. It's much safer.
Well, the weather, hasn't it been fantastic?
Not so much.
It has been in the past week, but
Patchy.
it suddenly changed over the weekend. Because
Yeah.
It was so hot here yesterday. It was unbelievable.
okay.
Me and the hub, we sat outside. Went for a meal at one of the pubs, and we sat out in the garden, and we had drinks and one thing and another. Had a lovely meal, and it was boiling, absolutely sweltering.
Well, it changed on Saturday because I got up early on Saturday because I actually drove to Newcastle to do a talk on Saturday, and I thought, God, where's all that nice weather gone? And during the whole journey, it was overcast. And Friday I drove up. Beg your pardon. Friday, stayed the night, and then on Saturday afternoon I did the talk in Newcastle. A thing called Truth Seekers Northeast.
Yeah.
And it's a nice, friendly group, lovely people. And I did my talk there on encounters with fairies, ghosts, and spirits, and went down very well indeed.
Oh, that gets us onto a subject, doesn't it? Fairies, ghosts, and spirits.
Tell us more.
It does. Yeah.
Come on, Neil.
Well, I've done this talk frequently around the UK at different places. And as I said to the people in Newcastle, I said that each time I do this talk, it evolves, like most things, because you get new information that comes along. So I said, if you'd seen me, say, 3 years ago do the talk at, say, the Probe Conference or Glastonbury or wherever else I've done it, and you're seeing me today doing it, i.e. in Newcastle, you're going to get new stories. Because the thing about when you do talks to the public, and you guys have probably seen other speakers yourselves at various events, is that at the very end, when the speaker's done their job, a whole load of people queue up to go and then share stories with the speaker, and it's no different to me, and people will come up and tell me their stories. Now, 9 times out of 10, the stories are average, but now and again you get a really gem of a story, and they're the ones I really remember and then think that's worth including in the next talk. So, for instance, an example is that I mentioned in my talk about a time when I was on an EasyJet flight going to Spain about 15 years ago.
That's a plug for EasyJet.
Yeah, yeah. Brought to you by EasyJet. And
Yes.
I ended up, my son was sitting to the right of me looking out the window, and the last guy that got on the plane was a dark-skinned gentleman who I thought was Spanish, but it turned out he said, no, I'm from Iran, but he said, I prefer to call it Persia. And so we got chatting, and he was going over to Spain because he was an architect now, and he said he was going over there to check on the properties and things like that. And he said, what do you do? So I said, oh, well, I do artwork and fairies, because at the time we were writing this book called Fairycraft and, fairy stuff. And I showed him a few of my illustrations on my phone, and that led us a bit into an esoterical discussion. So I think it opened him up a little bit more, because he said to me, oh, well, many years ago when I was conscripted as a soldier in Iran, he said I was patrolling the streets late one night with an army buddy, and a sandstorm kicked up, which is usually in those areas. And so we decided to seek shelter in a mosque one night. And I would put this probably somewhere in the 1980s maybe, or late 70s. Really wasn't sure of the year. He never said, based upon his age, though. And so he said that they sought shelter in the mosque, and they decided that they would, sit out the storm, as it were. And his army buddy would go to sleep. And this guy, I call him Hussein, decided to sit next to him against the wall, and he would have the gun and keep a lookout. And as is the custom in mosques, you have to take your shoes off. So they both had their feet bare, I guess. And his army friend fell asleep while this guy, Hussein, tried to stay awake. But he said each time he tried to stay awake, he kept falling off to sleep. And he said that as soon as he found himself falling off to sleep, he'd try and rouse himself to wake up again.
Yeah.
And so on the third attempt, he woke up after drifting off, oh my God, I keep drifting off to sleep, he keeps saying to himself. And on the third time he woke up, he said he suddenly saw this lady crouching down, staring at his feet, and next to the lady was a girl about 10 or 11 years of old, staring at his friend's feet. So he thought, where did they come from? I didn't hear them come in. So they were still engrossed looking at their feet. So he said he tried to wake his friend up by pressing his elbow onto his friend's chest to try and sort of wake him up. And he said no matter how hard he pressed, his friend wouldn't wake up. So Hussein said he decided to take the gun strap and wrap it around his fingers so that when he ran away, I mean, he's the guy with the gun, but he wanted to run away. He said that when he ran away, the gun wouldn't swing so much. And he said as he was doing that, it must have caught the eye of this lady that was staring at his feet. And he said as soon as she looked up and saw me and looked at me in the eyes, he said, I knew that she wasn't from this world. He said something just clicked and he thought, I know that this lady's not from this world. And he said at that point, the lady stood up and the young girl that was with her stood up. And he said they turned and walked away. And he says as they walked away, he noticed they both had cloven hooved feet. And when he told me that, I thought, oh, my God.
Oh, my God, that's one of the reasons why they...
Staring at their feet, exactly.
Yeah.
So I thought that is very interesting. So I said, could I use your story? And he gave me permission, but he said, please don't, show my name or anything. So, of course, I've told that at various venues and things. And I think it was when I was at the Probe conference, I told that story. And at the end of that particular talk, again, a lady came up and decided to tell me her story. She goes, I'm so glad you said that story because I've got a similar experience. I said, oh, really? And she said, yeah. When she had her baby, unfortunately it was a stillborn baby, they put her in this kind of, I don't know what they'd call it, a recovery room, a mourning room or something, with the dead baby in a cot beside her, and she's sitting there to try and come to terms with what's happened. And she said she sat on this bed with her head in her hands, crying and thinking, how on earth can I be strong for my family? I've just lost my baby here. And she was there for a few minutes in that sort of state. And then suddenly she says the door opened and she said she saw 5 small centaur beings come into the room. And she says they weren't beautiful little things. She said they were absolutely as ugly as ever. And she said 2 of them went up and stared and looked into the cot where this baby was. And then a couple of them came and started to stare at her and look at her. Now, she didn't say they did anything else. They didn't do any magical spells or healing or anything like that. She didn't say exactly how they went away as well. I presume she said they just vanished. But she said there was about 4 or 5 of them, and they were there for a few minutes. And then after that, she felt that somehow she had regained some sort of sense of composure and managed to kind of get through that ordeal. And she said she felt that those centaur beings had something to do with it. So I thought, wow, that's an interesting story. So, again, I took that one on board and decided to tell that to people that come and hear me talk.
Wow.
Very interesting.
These names of these beings and things, they've got to have started somewhere, haven't they?
Well, this is what I said.
Especially in folklore.
Exactly. I said, I mean, there's legends of people like Pan and, the devil supposedly got cloven-hooved feet. And I wonder if out there, and again with mosques and churches and things like that, that these places are kind of, not all of them, but some of them attract a kind of a connection between this world and another world. I'm not saying it's a spirit world with our dead relatives in it. I think it could be another dimension removed from that one.
Yeah.
Somehow they interact with us on certain occasions. And maybe these churches, because maybe the amount of people going in there with a kind of psychic intent of praying or something, it maybe creates some sort of manifest doorway of some kind, and these people can intervene and come into our reality that way. And it's like a different branch of humanity. We've evolved with the kind of arms and feet that we've got, and they've been a branch of humanity in some way, but they've evolved slightly differently. So, yeah.
Can I just interject?
Yeah.
Because last show, our whole show was about hybrids.
Ah,
Effectively.
right, okay.
Now, that really basically connects really seamlessly with what you're talking about, because you've talked about two what we'd always deemed to be mythological creatures, generally from Greek mythology. And I when I was a kid, I was taught about Greek mythology because my father was he's connected with a lot of Greek people, and the hybrid theory is very interesting, isn't it? Because it's like a mashing together of humanity and what we deem to be animals, or creatures that we now think don't exist. But in the King James Bible, there was I think it was a unicorn.
Oh, really?
That was in the King James Bible. It's one of the few types of Bibles that for some reason seems to allude to there being the existence of a mythological creature. So that's something that even people in the church don't kind of accept, but it's there. So the Word of God, you can't sort of, if you're a Christian person, you wouldn't be able to not accept the Word of God. So therefore, if that's the case, then these creatures do exist. So as a hybrid theory, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because you've also got the Minotaur and Satyr and Harpy. You've got so many different types. I wonder what it is. Do you think it's preparing us for what we may see in the future? Do you think?
Don't know. Because the thing is that these things are supposedly, as you say, go back ages. These legends. So it sounds like if these things exist, they've obviously been intruding into our airspace, for want of a better word, and they haven't been intercepted quite the way that we had hoped.
Do you think that we're being desensitized to seeing them? Because it can be quite shocking to the average person.
Well, given the fact that there's less churchgoers than there were maybe 100 years ago, maybe we're not sort of interacting as much because they seem to be associated with religious places. I mean, another story that I've told involved a guy that I used to work with some years ago at a satellite broadcasting place, and he worked on the night shift as a security guard, and he'd come from the West Indies originally, and I was working on the night shift, and one time I heard him chatting to this girl that was there, and I just overheard the word saying, "Oh, she was as white as that fridge freezer," and I pricked my ears up, and I thought, "Oh, that sounds something ghostly. I'm going to budge into this conversation." So I said, "What's that you're talking about, Owen?" Because his name was Owen. And he goes, oh, this woman I saw. I said, well, what happened then? And he said, well, when I lived in, and I think I may have got the island wrong of the West Indies, but I've said it's St. Lucia, but I could be wrong on that. But it doesn't really matter which one it is. All I know it's one of those islands. He said that he was at a bar one evening with his buddy, and they would take this regular route home to their houses. And he said they're walking around the corner after coming back from the bar, and they approached the hill that led up towards the church. And so as they saw it, they saw the church on the hill, but they cowered in fright because he said, we saw this huge woman sitting on the roof of the church. He described her, and it almost sounds like a science fiction cliche, as something like a 50-foot giant woman. And his friend ducked behind the gravestone in absolute fear, and Owen looked down and said, you see her too? So they cross-referenced it with each other. Yeah, we both see the same thing. And so you can't write that off as a hallucination, I guess. And so Owen, being the braver of the two, he picked up this rock and threw it as hard as he could through this 50-foot woman. And he said it just went straight through her. Now, I always say this to people, my God, it's not a good idea to throw rocks at 50-foot women. Don't pick fight with women anyway, but 50-foot women is a different matter altogether. So I said, well, what happened then? And he said, well, this woman just climbed off the church and walked down towards them, and she shrunk down to the size of a normal person and then just dissipated into the ground. Oh. And I said this at my talk. I said that, to me, said one inescapable truth that we should all address. And everyone looks at me thinking, what? I said, this explains that they're always trying to raise money for the church roofs. But I said to him, I said, so what do you think of that? And he says, I don't believe in ghosts, ghoulies, or things that go bump in the night. I just don't believe in them. And I think that was his way of trying to shut that reality out, because I think he was quite psychic, and maybe his mate was too. But again, this being was on his church. So we have a lady giant, if you like, on a Christian church out in the West Indies. We got these cloven-hooved people in a mosque. And then, you're getting these centaur beings running amok in hospitals. What's going on?
Well, there's plenty of stories of giants from the past, isn't there? So,
yeah,
there's obviously some sort of truth in it. Otherwise, why would they be talking about giants? I mean, they even mentions it in the Bible, doesn't it? Once upon a time there were
in those days,
those actual words.
Yeah, in those days there lived giants or were giants. Yeah.
So.
The Nephilim, wasn't it? Was it?
Yeah. I mean, the Smithsonian Museum. We had a guy on our show, the Paranormal Peep Show, maybe about 10 months ago now. Can't remember the exact date. Called Hugh Newman, who actually researches into these giants and the bones of them that have been hidden away in the Smithsonian, and they found loads of these giant human bones all over America, and they're just secreted away, buried in the chambers of Smithsonian, and not many people can get access to them, and not many people know about them.
Do you know, there's a tribe in Afghanistan, I can't remember which one it is now, but they live in a mountainous region of Afghanistan, and I think they have a culture that stretches back at least 1,000 years, probably a lot longer. But there was a sortie of American soldiers, a part of a recon outfit during the Afghan war, and they met up with these villagers who were very frantically pointing towards this cave and saying something like the red one, and the American soldiers thought, well, what on earth are they talking about? Got the translator down, and the translator was laughing at first, but then managed to glean that they were talking about the ginger-haired red giant. Now, apparently, it goes back a long time in Afghan sort of folklore. Mm-hmm. There was a group of red-headed giants living in that part of the world, and they were very, very strong. They were very tall. I think they were over like 12 foot tall. Mm-hmm. I think they were described as very muscular, but a ruddish complexion, big beards, usually had some sort of club of some sort, and they would speak in a very gruff, almost like a thunder. They said it was like thunder, and they said that they could run and jump very agile, so much agility for something so big. And the villagers were afraid of it, and they pointed and they said that it's angry, you're here. And that's what the translator was saying, he was angry because of the helicopters going overhead. And the story goes that they sent a recon unit in to investigate in this cave, and none of these Americans came out. There was about 16 of them, armed to the teeth with some of the latest hardware, and they got minced.
It sounds like they ended up in the teeth of the giant.
Yeah, I remember something about that story. Yeah, I do remember that.
And there was another 2 units that got sent in because that unit completely was wiped off the face of the earth. The other 2 units that went in, obviously there was one unit that went to surround the cave, and another unit stepping back in case it broke out somehow of the perimeter. When eventually, according to one eyewitness that survived, this giant strode out of the cave, pointed at the first American soldier, who must have looked at it in absolute sheer terror. Obviously offloaded every bullet he had, and it made no impact whatsoever. And this thing jumped off the ledge right on top of the American soldier and killed him dead. Then it swiped a boulder off the floor and rolled it like a bowling ball, and apparently it was the size of a shed. and it did it with absolute consummate ease. And then it rolled it towards the American Humvee, which was smashed to bits. And then all the Americans then scattered behind various areas to sort of defend themselves. And literally the second unit stepped forward and absolutely peppered it with missiles, like what do they call them, anti-tank guns, all sort. They were just laying into some heavy stuff, and it stood there for ages, swiping away, and eventually it was taken down. And the story goes that it was put into a net, and it was taken aboard one of their very large sort of planes that they use to bring in a hell of a lot of their hardware. And usually when they fill these planes, you're putting tons and tons of stuff in. They reckon this thing was way over 2 tons in weight.
This sounds like the sequel to BFG.
I mean, I don't even know if that's true, but the American soldier that was interviewed, obviously he was darkened out. He suggested that this thing was not of this earth.
So there's no military record anywhere, presumably, that might talk about this, like a log or something.
Well, when he left the army, the first thing he did is try and find out where it went.
Well, these things you very rarely, especially if the Americans are involved, very rarely find out where it went. There's an organisation out there, I can't remember what they're called now, that will take anything like this, and what they do with it, who knows? But,
It's a very interesting story, though. And actually, there is a folklore to do with giants living in Afghanistan. Apparently, that is true.
You see, that ties in a little bit, because about 15 years ago, and I mentioned this to Hugh Newman, our giant expert that we had on the show, I remember reading the Guardian newspaper. That's a British newspaper for those outside of the UK. And what it was that I think it was in China, like a desert in China somewhere. And this had been known about for years, but it only kind of surfaced after some time because of the communist regime out there, that they had actually unearthed some skeletons in China that had remnants of ginger hair and also what appeared to be sort of Scottish tartan or something like Scottish tartan.
Well, them Scots boys are big, I tell you.
Well, that's
big.
it. So maybe they left a few of their buddies in Afghanistan while they continued eastwards or something. And, but interesting, isn't it?
But have you noticed that a lot of these beings that all live underground or in caves?
Well, they don't get the housing opportunities like we do.
Yeah, there's always been the legends of the underworld and everything, isn't there? It's and maybe that's where you get the stories of hell being underground.
Yeah.
Connected to it with your cloven hooves, were you mentioning as well? Also.
Yeah.
It's there must be connections to all that. I mean, personally, I'd like to find out what all the secret files in the Vatican, because I'm sure there must be tons of stuff that's been removed from the Bibles and the original Bibles.
14 chapters.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to get a look on that. I think most of us would.
I bet you those 14 chapters answer every question that mankind has got.
Yeah, there's somebody done some research on that, isn't there? Somebody at the Vatican, funny enough. But they won't release it all. I think what they've done is they've done a sort of second-hand view of what might be there. And they allude to one of the chapters being written by Mary Magdalene, which you'll notice that she's got no chapter in the Bible at all, which makes no sense in a way. And then, of course, there was also an account directly from Jesus, which is completely missing in the Bible when it comes to first-person accounts. Do you see what I mean? Everything's written for him, about him. Do you see what I mean? So there's those two things, but there's also a number of other things they allude to, like the relationship between the Creator and humanity, and it's not as straightforward as we think.
Is that the chapter with Jesus? I mean, I remember reading something about hidden chapters of the Bible. There's a chapter, and I can't remember what it's called, where as Jesus, because obviously in the Bible there's there's a big gap of so many years between his childhood years going up to the age of 33 when he died on the cross. And somewhere in this chapter that's missing, it has Jesus having a school lesson, and he gets slightly peed off with the teacher and supposedly zaps him with a ray and kills him. So maybe that, and they suggested that's why they left it out of the Bible, because he didn't take kindly to the extra homework he was set, I guess.
Oh, I wish I had one of those when I was at school.
Yeah,
that is true, though, isn't it? There is a big empty space in between when he being a baby and then the next thing you know, he's a 33-year-old man. It's
Yeah,
it is an anomaly, isn't it? It doesn't make any sense, really, because if it's supposed to be dedicated to God and to the work of Jesus being the central character, and yet he actually has a very patchy sort of role in the Bible, which is really strange. I don't get that. And I also think that why would the church omit 14 chapters that's supposed to be the Word of God? It makes no sense. So there's got to be something they don't want us to know.
Well, you're making man more powerful than God, aren't you, by withdrawing those from everybody else? When you think about it, if that's supposed to be the Word of God, then man's trying to take that power away from God, isn't he?
I wonder how God views us thinking he was wrong, or it was wrong, rather.
Yeah.
I was telling the people at the weekend at Truth Seekers Northeast about the fact that I'm kind of proud to say it, really, in a sense that I was thrown off an alpha course. Do you know what an alpha course is?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I've done it.
Right.
No, I don't know what an alpha course is.
I don't know what it is. I think you'll have to explain it now.
It's nothing to do with Moonbase Alpha from Space 19.
Oh, I was thinking about alpha males.
No, it's nothing to do with that either. The alpha course is a Christian course to basically try and teach anybody who wants to go along. They run it all around the world, and obviously there's ones that happen in the UK as well. It's there to teach people, anyone who wants to go along, about the Bible and Jesus and how you can become a Christian, basically. Now, the reason you'd find a person such as me going on the Alpha course is that I like to occasionally sharpen up my knives a little bit and have a bit of a debate with them on these things. And that all stems from the fact that because I've been into researching mediums and spiritualism for the past sort of 35 years. And I remember one time I came out of Woolworths many years ago. Woolworths, yeah.
Yes, it was very much like Walmart, but...
Yeah. When Leslie Crowther used to advertise it on the TV kind of time. And I came out of Woolworths with I just bought an album for £5, so that shows how far we're going back.
God, sweetie, I hope you've still got it, because that's now collectible.
Well, £5, I can remember when I was 32 and 6.
Yeah. So with the change, I had like 50p or something. There was a lady outside Woolworths, and I put the money in a Save the Children tin that this lady was there. And there was two other ladies standing right by her with a clipboard. Now, I thought all three ladies were together, but I was actually wrong. It was only the two ladies with the clipboard that were by themselves. And they said, "Do you mind if we ask you a few questions?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And she says, "Could you tell us, do you believe in God?" And I went, "Well, not exactly." And then they said, "Do you have a religion?" And I said, "Well, not exactly." But I said, if you want to tick a box or write something down, you can put spiritualist, because I was investigating spiritualism and I was finding it was of an interest, but I still wouldn't say I was a spiritualist in the quotes. But I said, if you want to call me that, you can. They said, do you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior? I went, no. And I said, what's all this? I told them I was into mediumship and stuff like that and psychic stuff. And I said, what's all this about then? And they said, we're from the Gold Hill Baptist Church, and we're trying to do a survey to find out why we aren't attracting enough younger people into the church. I said, "Oh, right."
They were touting for business.
Yeah. So I said, so what's going to happen to me when I die then? And they said, "Oh, you're going to burn in hell." So I thought, oh, lovely. I said, what, despite I put some money in the Save the Children fund over there, I'm still going to burn in hell? And they said, yeah. And I said, why is that? And they said, that's because you haven't accepted Jesus into your life. And that really peeved me off. So from that day on, I decided I was really fed up with them because, like, if every time you went to a demonstration or something like that, you'd come out of the spiritualist church and find all these little Christian leaflets under your bloody windshield and stuff. And that really used to pee me off because I thought, well, we don't go there and do it to them. So I would always have these discussions with these Christians in the street and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I started to read into the Bible and books that sort of talked about it and picked out holes in it. So basically, many years later, when I'd kind of gained my initiation, as it were, in understanding things a lot better, I decided to go on a few of these alpha courses to try and, practice my skills a bit. And I'd actually say, I'd actually say to them, look, I'm into mediumship, psychic stuff, whatever like that. You'd call it, dealing with the devil or something like that. I said, but maybe I'm wrong. I said, maybe with your Jesus stuff, you've got something right and you can convince me otherwise. So I'm prepared to come to meetings and you tell me what you know. And so I went there. And the trouble is I still asked difficult questions they couldn't answer. I mean, one of them was, can you tell me, is heaven perfect? And they said, yes, it's absolutely perfect. And I said, so can you tell me then, if it's absolutely perfect, why was God having a fight with the devil and eventually he threw the devil out of heaven? I said, you couldn't have had it a perfect heaven, could you, if God was having an argument with the devil? And you could see the bloke wince, and he sort of had to backtrack a bit and say, okay, it maybe wasn't 100% perfect, he said. and there was a young guy there who went with his girlfriend, and the young guy kept saying to me each week, he says, I like you coming here. I said, why is that? And he said, well, each time they say something about the Bible, you come up with a really good point that sort of says the opposite, and it's really interesting. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So anyway, I got a phone call by about week 7 from the organizer, and he said, oh, do you mind not coming tomorrow?
Oh, that's nice.
So you were expelled from all of these things then, from all of these meetings. So. Oh, you're on their blacklist, aren't you?
I definitely am on their blacklist. And
don't invite Neil Geddies Ward, please.
Yeah.
Anything now out there that's to do with Christianity, don't invite Neil Geddies Ward.
Yeah, I'm a pain in their butt. I'm a pain in their. And I'll always debate them. I mean, getting Jehovah's Witnesses come to the door, and the thing is, they're knocking on your door, so it's not as if you've gone to invade their territory. When they knock on your door, they got to be fair play for it, So again, I throw logic at them, and they always say, I mean, again, for anyone that wants to debate with the Jehovah's Witness, you could try. I know we're not quite paranormal here, but this is just an interesting snippet. Is that I talk about Genesis to them, and I said, okay, God created. On the third day, he created the flora and the fauna, which is the trees and the bushes and things like that. Now, the Jehovah's Witnesses will always state that a biblical day is 1,000 years. So the flora and the fauna were created on the third day, I think it is, which is 3,000 years into creation. And then on the 5th day, i.e. 5,000 years into creation, or 2,000 years later, he created the sun and the moon. So I said, how does photosynthesis therefore work with plants when there's no sun in the sky for 2,000 years? And you see their eyes glaze over, and they say, maybe there was dust in the sky. I said, but the dust in the sky serves no purpose. What? Blocking out what? For 2,000 years that hasn't been invented.
And they always conveniently leave out all the prehistoric animals as well, don't they?
Of course, they leave out the giants and prehistoric animals, and
which we can prove existed.
Yeah, and also they conveniently leave out all the animals that were supposedly making their way to the Ark from places like Australia. I mean, there's the duck-billed platypus, and there's the koala bear, for instance.
Did they come in twos?
Yeah, I guess so. The koala bear eats eucalyptus leaves, and I don't think there's any eucalyptus leaves in the Middle East, for instance.
No.
You see? So I don't know what Noah did.
Yeah, that's a bit difficult, isn't it?
Well, his ship would have had to have been about 200 miles long to fit in all the animals and birds and eggs.
Well, that's it. Maybe it was a big spaceship.
Yeah.
And maybe all those things were in vials and test tubes, not actual animals.
So now people...
That takes us somewhere else.
Now, people, we have gone from cloven-hoofed beings to red-headed giants to Jesus Now we've gone through the Vatican and hit Noah, and now we are going into UFOs. What do you think of them, boys?
Well, the Vatican does have a telescope. They do have an official astronomer, don't they? So
It does, yeah.
He just looks at stars, does he?
but I do believe, I have heard Catholic priests somewhere, I can't remember which one, they do accept the existence of aliens. They do accept that God perhaps created aliens, and they just weren't under the scheme of fallen man, i.e. that they've sinned, because obviously with Adam and Eve and eating the apple, man sinned. Whereas aliens, they didn't have that scenario. So the Vatican is quite happy to accept aliens, apparently.
I mean, it'd be crazy to think there aren't any aliens when all the billions of planets there are out there. I mean, it's just ridiculous to think that we're...
Yeah. Sorry, David.
No, that's all right. Good.
So they're accepting of aliens. Our government still try to turn around and tell us occasionally there's no such thing.
Yeah, the Vatican will say they'll accept the possibility, and I do remember possibility. The Pope or one of these top people in the Vatican said they'd be happy to bless an alien if one such landed, and he would give them the blessing of Jesus and things like that. You know.
I'm going to try and convert them to Christianity already.
Yeah. In fact, also in the Bible...
They want bums on seats, don't they, in the churches?
In the Old Testament, there is the book of Ezekiel, I think it is, and he supposedly saw UFO Ezekiel, that's it. Thanks, David. He saw UFO type of structures, and he describes them, and they're like flying chariots or flying...
wheels within wheels, it's described as.
Yeah. And there was a guy back in the late 60s, I think he was like a NASA engineer or something like, who actually drew out all these descriptions and worked out that they could have possibly, with certain maybe modifications, could have flown as some sort of craft, interestingly enough.
You're in Eric von Daniken land now.
Yeah, Eric von Daniken. Yeah. We're interviewing him, by the way, I think in June or July.
I've already done it.
Have you?
Peep show, everybody, on the Paranormal UK Network, or go to Paranormal Dimensions on Air podcast on the Paranormal UK Radio Network for David's show.
We can only interview him for about 20 minutes. Originally they said for an hour, and then they said, you can only interview him for 20 minutes. And it was quite a funny email that we got through from his publicist, who is German or Austrian. He said, Mr. Daniken will only be interviewed in the afternoon, and I'm quoting their words, because he does not exist in the mornings.
That's his secretary.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it?
I can't think what his name is now, but I've actually been sitting in a pub drinking with Eric von Daniken and Nick Pope, believe it or not.
Oh, lovely.
I met him several times. In fact, one of the biggest things I had when I met him, sort of like the third time, I said, "Hello, my name's David Jones." He said, "Yeah, I remember you." So I mean, that sort of blew me away, really, coming from somebody like Eric von Daniken. You know, he's sort of one of the people that got me kind of interested in the ancients, in UFOs and everything in the first place. So
he's obviously quite an old chap now, isn't he?
He's about 80. I think he's about 82 now.
Yeah,
round about your age, then, David.
Yeah, no, not quite. Not quite. I've got a few more years left in me.
Have you read all his books, David? Or
I've read most of them. Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, the first one was Chariots of the Gods, wasn't it?
Chariots of the Gods with a question mark at the end of it. I mean, people like to sort of forget that. He's not actually saying they were Chariots of the Gods, but he's putting out the suggestion that's what they could be.
Yeah.
The second one was called Return to the Stars. Mm-hmm. And I think the third one was Gold of the Gods, because he was saying that the gods were coming here for the gold that we had back in the ancient times.
Which is what Stitchin says in his book, doesn't he?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of agreement with a lot of those old theories, in actual fact. I think, what was the other fellow? There's
Of course, von Daniken was brought up a Catholic, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Oh.
So that's how he started. So it's kind of ironic that he ended up then using the idea that Jesus came to Earth not in fact as a baby, but as part of an idea of his chariot. Because because he uses the chariot theory as a motif throughout all his thinking, which I think is why he chose it as his heading, because he wanted people to really get a good image of a chariot of the gods.
I mean, also when you think about it, when Jesus was being born in Bethlehem, there was the three wise men were following a star.
Exactly.
Now was that a UFO or
exactly?
Yeah. Stars don't move like that, do they?
No, you don't. No, I mean that takes me back to my childhood, watching a star moving and stopping and moving when it would have been like the late 50s. And I always back then I thought, it was just a star, but sort of later on, of course, I realised, well, stars don't do that. So what the hell was that? You know.
I think von Daniken also touches upon something a lot of us think, which is that early man who was influenced by the religious people around us actually were trying desperately to misdirect us from what was actually happening.
Oh yeah.
So I think based on some of the messages I've received, and I'm sure a lot of other people, is that it was basically a basic error of judgment. In other words, a misinterpretation of what was actually taking place.
Yeah.
In other words, the creator is what we think it is, as in probably you and I think it is, and not this kind of whimsical idea of a man on a cloud, zapping down nice happy thoughts to everyone and looking after the planet. Actually, it's much more complex than that, and it's actually more to do with creation and the God being an omnipotent, literally life force that is able to create whole planets. That I think, and obviously species as well. I mean, it's almost like we're in some sort of experiment, really, to see how we pan out.
The great Les Dawson was one of the proponents of an experiment by alien species, would you believe?
Les Dawson for everybody was
Is this a joke? Is this a joke coming?
Blankety blank. But no, he actually believed it. Although he was a very, very funny guy and very skillful in his comic delivery and everything like that, he actually had a kind of serious side to him, that he actually did believe that sort of mankind was as an experiment developed by aliens. I mean, this was years ago. I remember reading this in the 70s or something.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I know he was a brilliant pianist.
Yeah, that's right.
I didn't realise that he believed in aliens.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who types in Les Dawson pianist on YouTube and finds him playing
comedian.
awful piano playing, I was actually told that for him to play all those notes and they all sound awful, you actually had to be a real skilled pianist to do it right because of the way the notes are. Yeah.
Wow. Good old Les Dawson. I used to love him.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
But there are quite a few people in the entertainment industry that do subscribe to the idea of aliens and UFOs. I mean, the guy
there's quite a few in the entertainment industry that are aliens as well.
The guy that's the Ghostbuster, one of the original Ghostbusters, Dan Aykroyd.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
If
you've seen interviews with him on YouTube, he knows his UFO stuff absolutely inside out. He really is. He'll quote cases left, right, and centre to you. You know, he really does have an interest in them.
Yeah, Steven Spielberg does as well.
Yeah. Well, supposedly he was fed information. This is what I read. He was fed information when
Spielberg.
Scripting the mothership scene at the end of Close Encounters, where it lands at Devil's Mountain, I think it's called. That he was supposedly fed information that scenario actually happened, and so he spent a whole weekend in a hotel somewhere typing it all out from notes that was given to him by someone, and he got the whole of that section together about the Devil's Tower, or whatever it's called, with the mothership coming down, based upon the idea that they were bringing back visitors that they'd taken from them and then taking some more back with them. I mean, that goes into the whole thing of that book that I've read called Journey to Planet Serpo, I think it's called, Have you ever heard of that story, Journey to Planet Serpo?
That's a new one on me. Yeah.
Yeah. I bought the book after hearing something on the YouTube or something, an interview, and it actually ties up with the guy that used to be in Project Camelot, Bill Thingy, I can't remember his surname, and he was somehow involved in the website that put this out. But supposedly, in the early 60s, based upon this supposed landing of a UFO somewhere out in America, and there was an exchange between Eisenhower and, it was all secret hush-hush sort of thing. It was decided that they would take some American servicemen or specially chosen people to their planet of Serpo for like something like 10 years, 7 years, something like that. And these people supposedly lived on Serpo with these aliens for about 7 years. And I think it had twin sons or something, and it was very hot there. One of them died there, and one of them or two of them died on the journey back or something. So not as many people came back from the supposed journey to Serpo. And this whole story was kind of fed to Steven Spielberg, and he kind of incorporated elements of it into Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
All right. They'd have had to be travelling through time as well, though, wouldn't they? So...
I don't know how the physics works, to be honest.
Yeah, because of the distance factor and everything, it would take... if it's a planet nobody's heard of, well, it must be in a different star system, and perhaps even in a different galaxy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely a different star system, because they talk about twin suns. And they said the journey took them something like 7 months to get.
Right. So they must have been using some sort of time travel as well, then, if that story is true.
Yeah. I mean, people have shot the story down, saying it's not true, and it's a great little tale to read. As a little, if you took it as science fiction, it'd make a great movie, I think. But there's absolutely not much evidence apart from the website where people were supposedly the original people that went there were contributing to the website with their personal stories. And this book was a production of that website. It came out because it was believed that eventually the website might fall off the internet and no one would know about it. So this guy decided to put it all down as a book with people's diary entries of what happened today on Planet Serpo. But the planet itself, when you read that they're all in a canteen on Planet Serpo having their meals and that, it all sounds a bit kind of too Earth-like to me.
Yeah, a bit science fiction-y type.
Yeah. It sounds like a typical B movie from the 1950s.
Yeah.
It's great to read, but that's what comes to mind when I read it.
I mean, I'm not saying... I think it could be quite possible that if a civilization is, maybe 1 million years in advance of us, that they've got the sort of technology, they're beating that technology to actually bend space or something, or whatever they do. Or, I'm not against that. I think that's actually quite possible.
Yeah.
Well, I think some of the races use what's called symbiotic. So what I mean is the creature or whatever race it is that flies the craft is at one with the craft, and they're able to use the power of thought. It sounds really far fetched, but I reckon that's how they do it.
Well, they're already doing it. They're playing with that sort of technology now, aren't they?
Well, VR is gonna evolve into that, where we think what we shoot or what we see or where we walk or what we touch, and that is where we're heading anyway. So it makes total sense. And if we think that potentially these creatures are us from the future, that makes even more sense, because we are already dabbling in the early precursors to what that ends up being. So I think they're coming back to warn us about ourselves. And because we are our own worst enemy. After all, you only have to look around the planet to see what we're doing.
Couldn't they do a bit of a Star Trek there? Rather than having to come back and warn us, couldn't they just come back and go to the pivotal moment where history changes and they just go and shoot the president or whatever they have to do to solve their problem?
But maybe they're not allowed to interfere for some reason.
But they're coming back, and that's interfering anyway by coming back in time.
Maybe,
Yeah. There's a sort of a prime directive.
Maybe by changing it, though, we'll wipe out everything, and more than likely could wipe them out.
It's like a butterfly effect. There's another film called that, isn't there?
Oh, yeah.
Where you make one little change and it has so many repercussions right across
so many
everything.
ripples, don't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an Italian guy that had contact, and he said that he was a Christian, and he said that there were 190 different scenarios for the human race from that point. That this tall white told him, and he said that they came back to take samples to see how we were progressing, and also every now and again, if interaction could happen, they would convey through the power of the mind, because it say that we have the ability to use our minds better than we know. There's a quarter of our mind. I think it's a quarter of our mind we don't use at all. And apparently this is the area of the brain which is going to be developed eventually.
I think it's more than that, isn't it? We only use about a tenth of our brain, apparently, don't we? There's about another 9/10 that's unused. Mostly.
Well, that's even better.
On Jeremy Kyle, they use even less.
You can't say that anymore.
Oh, no more Jeremy Kyle, I'm afraid.
I'm shocked.
Yeah, but there definitely, you are right. There are some that use a lot less of the brain matter, I've got to admit.
We only use about something like 20,000 words in the English language, and there's something like 100,000 words, so that kind of ties up with that almost.
That's why my husband could never understand what I'm talking about when I start.
With all those long words,
Yeah. Okay, so now we've been through UFOs. How about ghosts?
Ghosts.
Ghosts.
Ghost.
Ghost.
Ghosts. Oh.
Ghosties. And ghoulies and ghosties. And besides me, has anyone ever seen one?
I've never seen one.
I've never seen one.
I've seen one.
You have?
Not to my knowledge, anyway. I mean, you might see one.
You haven't seen one.
I haven't seen one. Not to my knowledge.
You haven't seen one that well, maybe you have seen one, but just didn't click on that it was one. Because some of them, I tell you, some that I've seen are as solid in form as me and you, until they actually pass by you, and then suddenly you think, hang on a minute, something wrong there. You turn directly around, they've disappeared, gone, and there's nowhere they could have gone to.
I have to say, I live near Rendlesham Woods. It's well known for being pretty spooky and weird things going on.
Yeah, a lot of things go on in the woods.
I've been up there in the dead of night at sort of 3 o'clock in the morning. It's pitch black. You do see some funny shapes going around, believe it or not. Like from orbs, coloured orbs. I've seen a couple of orbs. With my naked eyes, but normally it's sort of like photographs taken. I mean, I know all orbs in photographs are not real, but I've taken several pictures, all in the same direction, sort of one after the other. Most of them just come out black, and then you'll get a couple that have loads of orbs in them, and then they'll go black again.
Yeah, but you've got to be careful, especially in a forest and at night time when the dew comes down, it could be moisture, things like that. But there are some weird ones. Yeah, there are those ones that are definitely are not moisture.
That's what I mean. Yeah. When you're taking one after the other, all within a few seconds of each other, and you can get invisible mist comes up as well. You can't actually see it with your eyes, but you do get shapes that come up. And
now, there's a friend of mine that goes down every year as well.
Yeah, that's right. Whether they're actually spiritual beings or what, I don't know. But they are, you do get some weird shapes, and you do get faces within these shapes sometimes. I mean, my friend of mine, Brenda Butler, you probably heard of her.
Nucleus, is it? Is it the nucleus something in the middle of the actual? Like if you look at a dust orb. You can actually, and you can magnify that, and you can see faces.
Yeah, that's right.
But I was down at the pub. As you know, I live in the country, and there's an old pub about a mile down the road. There's no houses anywhere near it, and one thing or another. And I was down there with a friend of mine, Karen, once, and we were taking photographs at night. And when we come back and magnified a couple of these orbs, I'm not kidding you, there was William Shakespeare in one of them. I would swear it was William Shakespeare or somebody like that. Another one had King Henry, you know, but they were absolutely brilliant faces. And you could even see, like, their clothes in these orbs.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
I don't doubt it, because, I mean, you get all different sizes
What those,
as well,
what those two were doing in an orb in Wales, I've got no idea, but still.
Were they caravanning?
Yeah, might have been, or camping out in the tent, yeah. But I'll tell you a ghost story, right?
Yes, please.
Okay. Now, where I lived in London, or South London, where my mother lived, which was on the other side of a park, she lived in the railway cottages. Now, the railway was built in 17-something or other, so those cottages were actually built for the people that worked at the railway station, you know, station master and all that. And when they were built, there was nothing in that area, no houses, nothing except fields. So there was these fields and these few if you could go back to 17th century, there's fields and these few small row of 4 railway houses. And a little bit further up would be the railway station, up a track or something like that. But there was nothing but fields surrounding it because, you know, I was told that by a historian. Anyway, I don't know when they built the park, but eventually when this place started becoming habitable and they were building houses around those cottages and everything, they built the park as well. And round the park, there was 6-foot black railings all the way around the park, except for the 4 corners of the park. It was a square park, and except for the 4 corners, there was always an opening to get out of the actual park. Well, I was walking through the park with my son in a pushchair. He was, at that age where, you know, little boys or girls say hello to everybody that goes past. Hello, 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 to all the strangers, and he was at that age. And coming towards us was this, and I don't know why I didn't click at the time. There was this little old lady with very, very heavy Victorian garb on, like winter clothes, and she had a walking stick. And she was walking towards us on the actual grass, what was the grass in the park. And I was on the path pushing the pushchair. And as we got closer, I said, don't say hello to that lady. Because for some reason I just knew that if he said hello, I'd have to stop and talk. But I never clicked that she was in Victorian clothes at that particular moment. For some reason, it just didn't register, although I could see her. I could still see her now in Victorian clothes and one thing or another. And he just gurgled away in the pushchair because he'd heard my voice but didn't know what I was saying because he was an idiot at the time. He was a baby. And, yeah, you're not an idiot, Billy. Never was an idiot, darling. Anyway, but he gurgled away, and I have to say that because he listens to all my shows. He gurgled away in the pushchair and one thing or another, and he never saw her. He could not have seen her because he was just sitting there looking straight ahead, and we were getting close now to the end of the park, and I could see my mother's house a few hundred yards, well, about 100 yards up in front of us. And as we went past the woman, she looked at me, I looked at her, and she said, nice day, isn't it, darling? Dearie, she said. Nice day, dearie, isn't it, dearie? And I said, yeah, I said, it is nice. And I carried on walking because I didn't want to get caught up in a conversation. I'd gone about 3 steps, turned around, and she'd gone. There is no way out unless she was a blasted marathon sprint runner or something like that. There was no way out this old lady could have got out of that park.
That's interesting because she interacted with you as well.
Yeah, I have had them interact quite a lot. Anyway, and I got out the park. I went to the door and knocked on the door. My mum opened the door, and I was just standing there, mouth wide open, because by now I'd realised I'd just seen a ghost. And she said, "What's the matter with you?" She said, "Seen a ghost?" I said, "Yeah." And I went inside and told her. Now, this old lady must have lived in those houses at that time.
Yeah.
You know?
Wow.
It must have been one of the residents of that little row of houses. And that, you know, I can still see her in my head. I can still see the clothes she was wearing, everything, the colour of the clothes, even the walking stick in her hand. She was a hobbly little old lady.
Did you not investigate to find out who lived there or anything?
Yeah, well, I talked to an old historian who's now well dead, called Archie, and actually haunts the pub down the bottom of the road. And he was telling me what it was like in those days, because he was a historian. He researched the whole area when he was a younger man. And he told me that where the petrol station now there was a pond and this, that and the other. So he knew quite a lot about the area. But sadly he died. He was old then, but sadly he died. And they put a plaque up above his seat in the pub, which was when it was a pub in those days, before it became one of these blasted, what are they called now? Where you eat food and everything, beef eater type places.
Yeah,
you know?
harvester type things. Or
Carvery, it's a carvery. He had his own plaque up on the seat and I used to walk in there for a drink and everything, and I could still see him sitting in that seat with his beer.
So
whereas other people, I knew he was a ghost in there, you know. He was always in there, old Archie. That's why they gave him a plaque after he died. But that's one of my ghost stories. I've got hundreds because I've seen so many.
Why do you think it is that, say yourself, Irene, that sees loads of ghosts, and someone like me and David don't see anything?
I don't know. I think everybody, all of us as children, do see these things. But as we get older, you know, things get knocked out of us. It weakens in some way, but with other people it doesn't.
I'll tell you, I mean, you mentioned about babies. I don't know if I've mentioned, Neil might not have heard this story, or Christian, I'm not sure. But when I was I'm not sure, I was in my cot, standing up at the side of the cot, and I remember seeing a purple mist come into the room. Yeah? And it swirled around the room, and it swirled up to me. And then it actually scared me. I didn't know what ghosts were at that age, you know, but I know it scared the hell out of me. And I remember my father coming in to find out why I was screaming and shouting, and he couldn't see it. I mean, in my baby way, I'm saying, "Look at that, can't you see it?" sort of thing. Whether I was using words or not, I don't know. But I can remember trying to relay that I could see this purple mist, and it just swirled back out of the room again. The funny thing is, when we were living in this house in London, around about that time, the lady that we were renting the house from, or our rooms at the top, lived downstairs, and apparently she died around about that time. So whether it was exactly that time, I don't know. But the fact that I can still remember that it was a purple mist. I mean, I don't know if anyone's got any explanations. I've heard a couple of people say that purple does mean something, but
it was the ghost of Prince.
No, he wasn't. He was. He probably wasn't born then. A baby then.
Yeah.
But no, I've always remembered. It's always stuck with me, you know, because I remember it terrified me as a baby, you know, for seeing that, and I didn't know what ghosts were, so.
Well, I can't remember. I think the earliest I can really remember is back to with seeing ghosts or spirits or whatever was back to about 3 or 4 years of age. Obviously, I can remember running around the village with my nappy down around my knees when I was about 2 years old and chasing my brother. But when it came to that sort of thing, I remember back about 3 to 4 year old, being 3 to 4 year old. But I think it also is to do with families. I think if there is a strong psychic, in the family, my grandmother, my grandfather, my father, not my mother, she wasn't. She said that she always said she'd never seen a ghost, although she was born in a haunted house, she'd never ever seen a ghost, and that's one thing she'd always rammed down my throat every time I said something about seeing a ghost. Oh, don't be stupid, Irene. I was born in if anyone's going to see a ghost, it's me. I was born in a haunted house. It's as if that makes her the one that can see the ghost. And I think that it's, if it's strong in the family, it's like other things can be handed down. I don't know, But like I said, I've seen so many. And you're talking about ghosts in the house. We had one called Mrs. Highland. And we know her name because when we described her to the old lady that lived next door, she said, "Oh, that's Mrs. Highland." And she took a shine into my father, who was very psychic as well, although he never told anybody. But she took a shining to him and used to follow him about. And he would see her often because he worked on the railway. That's how we got the railway cottage, because my father was a train driver. And he worked on the railway, and when he would come down early hours of the morning or late at night from the station, he could see her looking out the window as if she was waiting for him to come home.
Blimey.
And quite often when he laid in bed, he'd feel a stroke of a hand on his face and open up his eyes, and there would be this woman there, Mind you, cousins from Glasgow that came down and would stay with us quite often would get up in the morning and tell stories about the woman in the bedroom or one thing or another, even though they didn't know that the house was haunted. There were so many people. It's like this house. But I came home after clubbing it one night, pissed as a parrot, I've got to say, Lou. Absolutely bloody legless. That was my youth, not now. I can't. I'm allergic to alcohol now. But in my youth, I was, I came home after clubbing it early hours of the one morning, and I got into bed, and I'm laying there. And at the foot of my bed, Mrs. Highland, now she must have disapproved of this, she appeared at the foot of my bed, shawl wrapped around her. She had this shawl, kind of a lacy shawl that she had wrapped around her, and she was standing there just giving me the eye from the bottom of the bed, and I thought, sugar, I can't be bothered with this. So I tucked my head under the quilt, or blankets in those days, and I didn't come out until morning. She didn't frighten me, I just couldn't be bothered. I just couldn't be bothered to interact or do anything.
With regard to seeing these ghosts, have you ever noticed any of the spirits that you've seen, Irene, or anyone, with a sort of sparks or beams of light or something coming out of them?
No, but I've been told I've had them coming out of me by other psychics.
Yeah, the reason I say it is that Philip Kinsella and a guy from the Heavenly Voices team based down in Poole, and forget what the other person was now, described, might have been someone off, my friend Juliet, they've all described when they've seen spirits, more recently deceased spirits, I suppose, if I had to classify it. They've always seen them when they've appeared in the room to give a message or say something. They've all appeared to have, the guy that was in Heavenly Voices said that it was like sparklers coming off them. And Philip Kinsella described his friend that died with a kind of sparkler type effect, or sparks emanating from them. And I'm thinking,
must be some sort of energy.
Well, yeah, some sort of auric energy or something like that. I don't know, but maybe it happens to spirits that are newly acquainted with the spirit world rather than ghosts that have been hanging around for years, type of thing. I'm only assuming.
I don't know, because when I see them, they're a solid. I see them majority of them I see solid. It's like the story, and I've told this many a time on here. My son lived in this big old house. He was doing it up, actually. He was doing work in it. A big old empty house in South London. Gigantic house. It had the servants' quarters up the stairs and one thing or another. And he was converting it for the owner, the then owner that had bought the house in auction. He was converting it into apartments.
Mm-hmm.
And the first apartment that he converted, obviously, he moved in and lived there so that he could work on the job, sort of thing. And anyway, we went to see the house one day. We went to see him, actually, and he said, well, I'll take you around the house and show you what I've done. So he took us from one floor to the other, and we ended up in the attic, which would have been the servants' quarters. And I wandered around this all these different rooms in the attic. There was different rooms up there. And we were wandering around them and everything. And as we came out of this, went to come out of this room, my husband and my son stepped out, went through the door first to the outside of this room. And I was just about to go out the door when all of a sudden this woman appeared beside me. And she was dressed in, say 1920s, 30s. She was obviously the head of the household. You know, the woman that, what are they? The women that run all the other servants.
Yeah.
Oh.
Right? She was obviously that person, because that's the sense I got from her, the feeling that that's what she was. But she was dressed in those sort of clothes, and she... Uh-oh. Someone's trying to ring. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, someone's trying to ring Neil then.
Oh, I saw something flash on the screen. I had my eyes shut. I just saw it briefly. Right.
Maureen Walters for you later on.
That's from Truth Seekers Northeast, ironically.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right.
I was trying to do it without any sort of interruption, but obviously it didn't work, did it?
Yeah. But getting back to my story, I looked at her, she looked at me, and she looked as shocked at me to see me as I did her. And then all of a sudden, as I'm staring, looking at her, I heard my son, "Are you coming, Mum?" And I turned and looked at the door where he was, and then she just vanished. She went. She just gone. And I went out the door, and I never bothered to say anything. You know? But she acknowledged me. Now, whether that was some sort of time slip I just went through or kind of tilted on the edge of, I don't know. And maybe she thought she'd seen a ghost.
Yeah.
Because there's me in modern day
Yeah.
clothes as well.
Did you see ghosts as well, Christian? Did you say?
Yeah, when I was younger, I did. Yeah, I stayed at a house many years ago. I think I was about 8 years old, something like that. Yeah, just moved into a house and they hadn't got the furniture in yet, and it was in the early 80s. I remember that, and we moved into the house and we ended up staying. Me and my brother. I had a brother who was just a year younger than me. We had like bunk beds, but we couldn't put them out just yet, so because they were supposed to go upstairs. So we stayed downstairs in one of the front rooms, and I was awoken on, I think it was the second night, to a blinding light emanating from the middle of the room, and so I very carefully removed my duvet cover so I could just peep underneath because I was scared out of my wits. And as I looked across, I saw a very ornate, very heavy-looking coffin with brass sort of handles on the side, and I could see the lid was slightly ajar, and this absolutely blinding white light coming out. I'd never seen anything like it, and I looked across, hoping my brother was awake, but he was snoring his head off, unfortunately. So unfortunately, I was the one that only saw it. I thought I might have been hallucinating because I was quite a stressful time moving into a new house, being so young as well. So what I did is I pinpricked my hand. Well, I basically pinched the inside of my arm so hard that it bled, and I had some nails then, so I was like really digging in. Made sure I cut myself just to make sure I was awake. And obviously I was so scared, and it took me ages to get to sleep. The next morning I woke up, and sure enough, there it was, dried blood on my arm. So, I mean, make of that what you will. I don't know. I did see other things.
Were you in a bedroom?
No, this was a downstairs.
Yeah, you see, they used to
front
lay them
room.
out in the front room in their coffins.
Well, it was the front room. Well, I found out after, just to confirm what I found out when I was older, because there were two things I found out about the house. About 10 years after we left that house, my mother just inexplicably said I had a phone call from the old person that used to live in that house who sold it to us. And she said, oh, the old lady rang and said, how did you find the house? And she said, oh, we're moving in really well, everything's going well. And the old lady said, so is everything all right then? And my mother went, yeah, why are you asking that? She said, oh, well, you know, you haven't heard any strange noises or anything. And she went, well, the odd footstep in the middle of the night. She went, just like she knowing kind of like that, as if she knew what we were talking about. And I just remember my mum saying, as a matter of fact, why did you sell us the house for $2,000 under the asking price? Because it was seller's market at the time. And the lady said, well, my husband loved the house but just hated the ghosts. And you know what? The funny thing about that is that my mum didn't believe in ghosts until she lived there. And I always believed in spirituality because I was contacted many times by different spirits. But I remember seeing a funeral procession in the moonlight in the garden, which actually didn't appear until the moon. See, I'll try and paint the image for you so you get a really good idea.
I've already got it in my head.
My window was about, I don't know, 12 foot up in the air, looking down at the garden. I had a little swing on my little tree and a little stream going to the left. And there was a moonlight coming from the right, and it was shining just underneath the tree. And I remember looking down just before I went to bed, and I thought, wow, the sun looks like a piece of silver in the sky. It was so bright. There was no clouds in the sky. It was amazing to look at. And just as I looked to my left, I saw this mist appear. Rather like one of you said earlier, this mist just appeared from nowhere. And I thought, what the heck is that? And then it went into the moonlight, and gradually I could see it forming into figures. And first of all, I saw a man with very old clothing on from an era I didn't know. As I now know is probably the 18th, maybe 17th century, I don't know. But he had a top hat with a cape, and he had a big cane, and he was flicking it up and down in his hand. And I thought, what on earth am I looking at there? I was absolutely transfixed. As an 8-year-old kid, I didn't know what I was looking at really at first. And then as it started to, the mist started to settle, I could see more people come through the mist. And I saw big sideburns on the side of their heads as well. And I could even see jewellery on their fingers.
Like
Elvis, was it?
So it was Elvis. So it was like a Victorian funeral then.
Yeah.
And the man with the top hat and the cane is the one that
he was leading it.
Yeah.
He was leading it, and he was like flicking the cane up and down.
They do.
In front of him. And it didn't last very long, but as soon as they went out of the moonlight, they disappeared. And that's when I knew I was looking at something that wasn't real. But it was just incredible. But I found out since that in the local area, it's a place called Meal Brace, which is, means two badgers in Old English. It's in Shrewsbury. It's basically a contention of history that somewhere in Meal Brace there is a field or an area that was bought by the local diocese, the church, but had to be sold off for mysterious reasons. And all they did is took the headstones. They didn't take the bodies.
Typical poltergeist stuff.
Well, if you think about it, if it's underneath that house, which I believe it probably is, how, there were very religious people in those times. They would have absolutely gone berserk had they have known that their lands, their resting place had been desecrated. So it makes total sense that they would have been restless spirits. And I saw so much stuff there. I ended up getting examined by doctors because I was constantly seeing stuff and constantly being contacted by all sorts of very restless spirits.
It sounds very much like the house I live in now, but,
There's got to be a connection there with some sort of, I don't know, something in the past has happened that's triggered those restless spirits. I strongly believe that.
Yeah.
It's interesting that they manifested in the moonlight, which also reminds me a little bit of Pirates of the Caribbean idea when the moonlight comes out,
yeah.
you know. And so I wonder if somehow the moonlight has some sort of scientific physics effect or something that will help spirit manifest in some way. Because you get all these legends about the werewolf appears on the moonlight, blah, 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 don't you?
Full moon, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's people that
And the
actually
vampires
react
come out
to
at
the
night,
moonlight,
yeah.
don't they? It's something to do with the waves, isn't it? What's the word I'm looking for? There's a wave that's sent from the moon to the earth that affects us, our brain waves, doesn't it? I can't remember what specific energy it is. Is it? Somebody must know the answer to this, but I read somewhere that on a certain time of year when the moon is very powerful, certain people's brain waves are affected.
Yeah,
You get
and that's
something
when.
called lycanthropia.
Yeah, or
where
Moonlight
people-
Maniac.
But you get the lunatic idea, don't you, as well?
Yeah, Moonlight
Well,
Maniac.
it's called the lunar effect. It's named after the Greek word luna, which I can't remember what it means, but that's what the Greeks called it. They called it the lunar effect.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Oh, by the way, I did some research on your purple, by the way. The purple mist that you were talking about.
David?
The purple mist, yeah.
Yeah, so the definition of purple means calm stability of blue and a fierce energy of red. The colour purple is often associated with nobility, luxury, power, ambition, and represents the meanings of wealth, extravagance, creativity, wisdom and dignity, grandeur, devotion, peace, pride and mystery,
So-
independence and magic.
So how does that link to me then?
I don't know.
as a baby, does that mean I was the chosen one? No.
I don't know. It's probably a mixture of both.
I'm nowhere near rich or anything like that, but maybe a little bit
Well,
of
not
wisdom. I
well.
don't know.
You can be rich in all different types of ways.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know, but I always suspected it was something to do with the spirit of the old lady that died, who owned the house, but I don't know.
Maybe a favourite colour was purple.
Well, yeah, I suppose that's right. It could have been, but I mean, it obviously wasn't, because you don't usually dream in colour, do you? Although I think I have dreamt in colour myself, but it certainly wasn't a dream, because it's been so. And I actually spoke to my father a few years, when I could sort of talk to him later on when I was a young teenager. I said, "Did you remember that?" And he still remembered it as well. Me screaming about this purple mist, so it wasn't a dream.
That's
It's obviously
it's
very significant.
Oh yeah, it definitely was. Yeah,
it's got to have meant something at the time, definitely.
It stayed with me all the time.
It's interesting. You both talk about mists because years ago I did a tarot card reading for an old lady, and she said, "Oh, it's all very accurate, but there's one thing you didn't mention." And I said, "What was that?" And she goes, "You didn't mention my husband." And I said, "Well, if I'd felt him around, I definitely would have mentioned him." And she goes, "Let me show you." And she showed me the bedroom, which she lived in this little old bungalow. And she goes, "My husband spent the last year of his life ill in bed on an oxygen machine." And she'd puff his pillows up every day to try and make him feel more comfortable. On one particular occasion, she was doing that, and he said, "I feel so ill, I just want to die." And he actually promptly just died in her arms. So she laid him back down, and she said, "I know you won't laugh, but my doctor laughed at this." She said she saw this mist, again a mist, rising out of his body, and it went up towards the ceiling and went into the airing cupboard in the corner of the room. And she was totally gobsmacked. But it doesn't end there. She said that 6 months later, she'd wake up in the middle of the night. She said, this is her word, she said, "I saw a red Indian coming out the cupboard." And she said she could only see him from the waist upwards, and he appeared to be sort of like clawing or scrabbling his way out the cupboard. But she said she could see a man behind him, and behind that man was a third man who appeared to have a bowler hat on. But she could clearly see the Indian with a necklace, feathers and everything. And this lady had not been exposed to any ideas of spirit guides or spiritualism or anything like that. She hadn't got a clue what was happening. And so I explained to her what I thought the scenario was. And I said, "I think your cupboard door in the corner is acting as a revolving doorway might do in a hotel. Things can go into it and things can come out of it." And I said, "It's a portal of some sort, I believe, between this world and the next. And I said, the mist that you saw coming out of your husband's body, I think was his soul. And it seems to be that when people perceive mists, it's maybe the start of a psychic manifestation of some sort, maybe even a materialization, perhaps.
Well,
I've heard many stories where mists actually leave the body as they die. You know, they've been seen to leave the body as they die.
There is a religion, I think it's the Rosicrucians, I can't remember how you pronounce it. Part of their training is to observe the soul of a person as they die, to watch their soul leave the body.
I think it's Rosicrucians, wasn't
That's
it?
it, Rosicrucians, that's it.
That's it, yes.
I tell you one where I was touched once. Okay. I had my old neighbours up in South London, Flo and Jim, very elderly couple. Flo was always in my house every chance she got to have a cup of tea. And her husband Jim became very, very ill. And over those few days he was laying in bed in the other house, waiting to die. I would go in and visit him, and if she had to pop down the shop, I'd go and sit with him and prop his head up and try and give him a drink and things to stop him being dehydrated. And I said to him on one of these occasions, I said, Jim, if you need me for anything, just let me know. Right? Well, that night we're sitting watching television, and all of a sudden I was tapped on the shoulder. I turned around, there was no one there, but I instantly knew it was something to do with next door. And I ran in next door, and Flo was there crying her eyes out. She said, he's dead, he's dead, he's dead, and everything. And I checked him, and yeah, he was dead. And I swear blind that he actually came to tell me that he needed me at that moment. Because Flo needed me at that moment. You know, because I just got up and ran. Left the kids, ran next door. You know, left my husband with the kids, didn't give any explanation. I just knew I had to get in next door. So that was one of my experiences, another one of my thousands and thousands. I'll have to write a book, you know. I really should write a book. But witches now, how about witches? Anything to do with witchcraft around the areas that any of you boys live in?
Well, around my area, Suffolk, is well known for witches. I mean, I don't know anything about them, I'm afraid. There is a village called Butley, which is just outside of Rendlesham Woods, which is actually one of the earliest known
How do you spell that? Sorry.
Butley, Butley.
Okay.
He's researching right now.
I understand that Alistair Crowley used to go into Rendlesham Woods quite often to do whatever he did. I don't know what, you know. Yeah, apparently. I think he was, I don't know if he lived in this area for a while or if he used to visit here, but he is quite well known to have gone into Rendlesham Wood quite a lot. To do what, I don't know. But I
don't think it was UFO spotting.
No, I don't think it was, no. But obviously Rendlesham was quite famous for all sorts of things. I think the witches used to do whatever they do in the woods as well. You know, sort of going back hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Because this area is also area.
Well, they used to go foraging in there because witches, you know, they weren't actually witches, they're more like wise women. And they'd go foraging for the herbs and things that they needed for medication or for cooking with and one thing or another. And woodland is one of the best places to look.
Yeah, because this area is actually where the Witchfinder General used to
I was about to
business as well.
He got around, didn't he? What was his name again?
Matthew Hopkins, was it?
Matthew Hopkins, Witchfinder General.
Yeah. Or Vincent Price.
Yeah. Vincent Price, yeah. But, because he used to hold a lot of the witch trials and everything in old inns.
He did.
Yeah, and not only did he hold the actual trial and find everyone guilty, but he also used to either hang them in the inns or just outside.
He was
because
getting so much per hanging, wasn't he? Or?
Yeah, because hanging was the way to do the witches over in this country. You know, everyone says, "Oh, burn the witch," but that was more on European soil. You know, France, Germany, and places like that where they put them on the bonfire. But
We needed to save our firewood for winter.
over here it was, the noose flung over the old bough of the tree or whatever, and hoist them up. But so, what have you found, Christian? Anything?
I've only found a census on, just the population in 2000 Butley Village. Also, it was, the earliest church it had was a Baptist church, and there's very little information on Wikipedia. But I'm going to keep on searching while you're chatting away.
Well, look at the Suffolk area in general.
That's what I'm going to do. Yeah.
There's also this famous
Suffolk witches.
story of there's a lady called Doreen Valiente who was part of the original kind of witchy thing. I only know this because my ex-wife was well into the witchcraft thing, and I used to go to Witch Fest with her and stuff at Fairfield Falls. And but I know that they sort of tried a kind of spell to stop Germany invading in World War II.
That's right. The people with gifts of any type, whether mediums or whatever, they were used during the war, especially witches, to try and keep them away from the shores. Sort of thing.
It's funny though, they use witches to keep Hitler out. But they tried Helen Duncan, the materialization medium, during the wartime to keep her shut up. And yet she was tried under the Witchcraft Act, ironically.
That's right, she was.
Yeah, exactly, to keep her shut up.
Because, well, I'll just say for the listeners, I'm sure many of you know the story, but for those that don't, Helen Duncan, she was a materialization medium. In other words, she used to hold seances where, because it was wartime, it was mostly dead sailors coming through that are drowned at sea through sinkings of their ships during the wartime, and they would come through and say, I drowned on the HMS Hood or whatever ship it was.
My uncle went down on that.
Really?
My great-uncle,
Well, all this was getting out, and the ministry at the time didn't want people to know that their ships were being sunk by the Germans because they thought it was bad for morale. So, in fact, they took her and tried her at the Old Bailey, of all places, a small-time medium. I think she was up in Scotland, I think she was, being taken down to London, tried at the Old Bailey. And she wasn't given the opportunity to defend herself very well, because she actually offered to give a demonstration of full materialization in the court, and they said no, because they just said no, it's trumped up, it's witchcraft, and we're putting you away, and that's that. And they just put her away for the duration of the war to get her out of the,
kangaroo court.
A kangaroo court, yeah.
Yeah, and we had a granddaughter on, and interviewed her granddaughter a couple of years ago, and she's still fighting to clear her name.
Yes, yeah. There's been a conference or two, I think, about Helen Duncan. But very, very interesting lady. But she never really recovered from it, because I think when she was caught, if you like to use that term, during the séance, one of the people opened the lights or pulled the sheets or something like that, and she was badly harmed from the exposure to daylight. Because in a séance like that, you can't do it in full daylight, because it's supposedly very sensitive to the normal daylight, which is interesting. It brings us back to the moonlight, where you can manifest things. So maybe there's a difference between daylight, sunlight, and moonlight, But it makes the ectoplasm, which comes out of the medium, recede back into them, and it can cause injury to them. And she never fully recovered from that and died about 8 or 9 years later, I believe.
Yeah. Have you got anything, Christian?
Right, okay. So the only thing I found was The Witches in and Around Suffolk by Pip and Joy Wright.
Are they modern day witches you're talking about?
Well, actually, it goes back 300 years, as far as I can tell. And it basically goes through the confusing and comforting lives of witches throughout the ages, and their habits, be it die hard, and their association with infestation, storm, blight, sudden death, sorcery, and something else which I can't quite read what that says. But it's basically a synopsis of all the things that they're always associated with.
Well, yeah,
quite negative.
half of these people, like the Pendle witches and one thing or another, half of them weren't actually witches. You had the wise women and one thing or another, but anybody that had a beef against their neighbour or something, they would turn around and say, they put a curse on my cattle, I can't get any milk, this, that and the other. And they would be taken off and hung. And especially in Hopkins' days, if you had a spot, a boil on your bum, anywhere at all whatsoever, you were a witch. Yeah, and how many... I'll tell you what, if they went round and examined us all now, we'd all be witches. Because we're not flawless at all, are we? We're not flawless.
I'll just tell you a strange thing. I've just picked a book up called Haunted Ipswich. I've just opened it, nonchalantly anywhere, and it's just come. I'm straight on to the Matthew Hopkins Witchfinder General. So I don't know if that's a supernatural thing or what. But, to actually go straight to that page, I don't know. Yeah,
he gets everywhere.
Yeah, he does. And what I used to laugh at is the dunking of the witches, down at Canterbury.
Oh, yeah.
And in one of my favourite restaurants in Canterbury, they got a stream that runs upside the restaurant, and they've still got the dunking stall there. And of course, if they dunked them, what was it? If they stayed under the water, they were classed as innocent. If they came up,
if they drowned.
If they came up, then they were witches.
They're classed as witches. Yes.
But water was on their side because they're damp, and so you couldn't burn them.
Yeah, they didn't burn them in them days.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? It's they can't win, could they? They couldn't win. Let's face it. You either drown and you're innocent, or you come up and you're hung as a witch.
Now, of course, there's the Salem witch trials over in America, wasn't it?
That happened just after Air Pendle, didn't it?
I'm not sure the date.
I think it came after Air Pendle Witches, which was very, very much on a similar line, where a young girl accused somebody of something or other, and that was it,
Wasn't it to do with... Well, I saw this Channel 4 documentary some years ago where they thought it was to do with mold spores on the wheat or corn or something that was causing like LSD, like hallucinations. Did you hear that one?
Oh, I didn't hear that one, but I can quite believe it, because mold is, especially black mold, is.
Well, it's some mold spores that, because they're growing it in, and they're storing it in a barn, it might get damp, and the mold grows and things. And these people are grinding it down into bread or whatever they're doing with it. Then they're all eating it, and of course, they're getting this LSD type of effects from it. And of course, the whole village was therefore seeing these, whatever they're seeing under these hallucination type things. And of course, they're all going a bit crazy from it. And so that's where the whole thing got completely out of hand. And, half the village ends up hanging itself, basically.
Oh, so now we've got. I tell you what, there's going to be a hell of a lot of people storing wheat just to get the mould on it.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Cheaper than the weed, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. Do your own. Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't think there's a Matthew Hopkins in that type of area. But I mean, certainly, again, that was driven by the Bible. And it just shows how really these things can get totally out of control in the name of religion, and really. I'm not saying that science wins at everything, but really, looking back of it, it was just a sort of the nature of the beast of where they lived that caused the problems, rather than any kind of evil or something in their midst.
Yeah. Right, now,
doesn't that just show you how things can be misinterpreted, even so late in human evolution? I mean, that's 1692 you're talking about. Just checked it up. So 1692, we're talking quite relatively modern human history, and even then, they were completely misinterpreting such basic scientific things we could work out just by testing the bread.
Yeah.
Whereas back then, they had to go on religious fervour and accusation, paranoia, and well, let's just face it, false accusation based on religious extremism.
Yeah.
And that is effectively what that drove that, and that's exactly what drove people to jump to assumptions and conclusions back in the early biblical age, and you can imagine how jumpy they were then, because they were very, very careful to try and keep their power base. Certainly the church at that point wanted to keep control and influence over the people, which is why Jesus had to die.
You could almost argue, or maybe it would suggest then, that if the same spores on those breads in Salem, you could maybe say similar mold spores could have been forming on the bread they're making in biblical times. And so therefore, all these people that are suddenly seeing burning bushes, God's talking to them, or they're seeing angels or whatever, could be the result of the bread they're eating.
Could be.
Yeah, see, I was always told to eat my crusts, and now I don't.
You'll get curly hair.
Right, now moving on again. Cryptos. Unusual beasties.
Like the Loch Ness Monster, I presume.
well,
Does that
the
come
Loch
under
Ness-
cryptos? Or?
Yeah, it does. That is their most famous one. Or the big cats, which could be
Bigfoot.
big. Yeah, it could be big cats because back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, there was a craze for keeping tigers and lions and God knows what else in this country, and a lot of them were released out in the wild as soon as they had to be licensed, and people had to pay for licenses. I had a boyfriend that had an alligator in his bath.
Oh my God!
You know, yeah. He used to keep an alligator. When it got too big for the bath, it did go to London Zoo, but people were keeping all strange animals.
There's all those
exotic
legends
animals.
where people supposedly flush things like alligators down the toilet, didn't they? 50-foot huge alligators that come out the sewers and stuff, you know.
Yeah, New York,
Come
apparently.
up the toilet pan and bite you on the bum. But cryptos, right.
Well,
Beside our flying hedgehog man, which I keep on repeating over here, what other cryptos, or what cryptos do you know of here on the British Isles?
Deborah Hatswell would be the one to answer that one, I think.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, Deborah. We've had her on the show as well because she's one of the big authorities on Bigfoot in this country, or what we call Bigfoot. You know, you've got the what's his name up in Scotland? Christ, forgotten what he's called now, but he is a type of Bigfoot. Here, you've got the one that is often seen around Snowdon, Mount Snowdon, and he's a type. He's a bit.
Got Yeti in Nepal, haven't you? So,
Yeah.
Yeti. You've got Sasquatch in America.
I remember a time, right now, I didn't know a lot about Mothman. I'd heard basically it, you know, in the background and one sort of thing, but cryptos were never my scene. So I really didn't take much notice. And I came out the bedroom one day, and opposite, as you come out onto the landing, there's a small window, and if you look through the small window, you can see right out over the fields to the cricket club down the road. And I came out the bedroom, and it was a moonlight night, and it was really lovely. Moonlight again, funny.
Yes,
There you go.
You could see the
Keep
fields
going.
and everything. And I saw what looked like, I can't explain it, it could only be Mothman with his legs out the back. And it was right down the road by the cricket field, and he was flying, you know, down there, as if he went out off of the view of the window in the end. But it was like a big owl, but it had like legs, like man's legs hanging out the back. And even now, when I get up, I go to the toilet in the middle of the night or something, I always look out that window. Always look out that window.
We've almost gone full circle, haven't we? Because we started off almost talking about
half beast, half man.
cryptids.
But
Really, didn't we?
get him back to cryptids, you know. You had Owlman, didn't you? Down in the West Country.
Now, some people suggested like barn owls and things like that are actually the greys trying to cover their tracks a little bit by making themselves appear to be creatures that you might be familiar with, like
like shape-shifting,
yeah.
Yeah, but barn owls, we know barn owls as well, don't we? Because there's a lot of them kept in captivity as well, and bird places, and a barn owl is a barn owl. As far as I'm concerned, it is an owl.
I do know that the Loch Ness Monster was actually mistaken. An elephant was actually mistaken for the Loch Ness Monster once.
Oh, how the hell did that happen?
Because there was a circus in town, apparently, and they were actually letting the elephants bathe in the loch, and obviously it was spotted. Someone actually saw it and thought it was the Loch Ness Monster. That's in Malcolm Robinson's book.
With the trunks coming out of the water, you'd think it was a neck of the creature, wouldn't you?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, I suppose
especially if you were in the distance on the other bank.
Yeah, seen from a distance. That's right.
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure I don't know if it was in the 40s or the 50s, but it was somewhere around about that sort of period.
Well, there's quite a few lake monsters in the UK. You know, I can't name them all off heart, but you know there are quite a few. I know that, and especially in Europe, in the lakes in Italy, there's meant to be one in Como.
Lake Como in Italy.
Wow. Are they supposed to be the same type of beast or something different?
I don't know, because I've never actually seen one yet. The nearest I got to seeing a Loch Ness Monster was buying an ornament at the shop, the souvenir shop up there.
Now, you've touched a key point, really, because if you think about it, with all the technology that we've got supposedly to detect these things, that if they suddenly said, oh, well, we've done a sweep of Loch Ness, we've absolutely categorically ruled out there's nothing in there.
Yeah, they tried that, haven't they?
Then their whole tourist industry around that area would collapse, wouldn't it?
But Como, I think, is deeper than actually Loch Ness, isn't it? It's a lot deeper.
Don't know much about that, actually.
Because I've been, yeah, I know because I know.
1,300 feet.
I've been looking at houses up round Como.
Oh.
Get out my price range.
Then you get into then you think, well, if it is a Loch Ness Monster, say, is it paranormal or is it just an unknown animal? You know, it's they're
finding unknown animals every day, aren't they?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Unless something's coming through from another dimension or something.
Yeah.
As is theories with some of these other cryptids that we hear about. Like the Bigfoot and...
Well, I often wonder, you know, if these animals are kept in spaceships or something like that, or are part of UFOs or something like. When you think about family pets, right? Family pets, what do? We let them out to do their business, don't we? How do we know that they're not just dropping them off to let them have a stretch their legs?
A lot. Yeah,
go and stretch your legs.
Yeah.
Come back.
And let him run around for a little while.
Come back when you're done, Chewbacca. You know.
Taking Mothman for a walk.
Yeah, don't cock your leg there. Not on the roses.
But there was actually the story of the Gateshead Grey up in near the Newcastle area, which is this guy called Robert. I forget his surname now. It's a Richard D. Hall film from about 10 years ago where...
I've seen it.
Yeah, for those that haven't, it's this guy that was, as a youngster, sort of round sort of the Gateshead area, he said that this... And no one really talked of flying saucers back then, you know, in the wartime years. He said this saucer had landed... it had a shimmering effect, and these people came out of it. But he said, also, oddly enough, he said, you'd never believe me, but he said, I saw what you would call a Bigfoot standing next to the saucer as well.
Yeah.
And they've long been associated with saucers landings, Bigfoots helping them out in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, there are several stories about it being linked with the UFOs,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know whether we've got anything else to talk about now. Then bye-bye, everyone.
How long have we got left?
You've got about 4 or 5 minutes, haven't you?
Tell everybody what we're all going to be doing in the next few months, maybe. Appearances or talks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Carry on, then.
Well, shall I start? I've
Yeah.
got a Colonel Holt conference which I'm planning, which is already well underway. Actually, I've got half the tickets sold in September the 8th in Woodbridge near Rendlesham. If anyone's interested.
Yeah, and you're going to be talking about the Rendlesham Forest incident with Colonel Holt.
Well, Colonel Holt will be doing the main thing. I'm just being an MC. Malcolm Robinson is going to be talking about UFOs. John Hanson's going to be talking about his books and Colonel Holt's book, which he wrote with him. It's going to be an all-day event. Sasha Christie's going to be doing a presentation.
Yeah.
David Bryant is another going to be doing something about the Rendlesham the Weird Woods. And it's Gary Bradfield is also going to be doing a little presentation. So it should be a good event. I mean, it's only £20 for a ticket. And really, that's just to cover expenses. There's not a money-making thing in it. It's just, you've got to pay for hotels and flights and all sorts of stuff. So,
Excellent.
yeah.
Sounds great.
And what date is that again, David?
That's the 8th of September.
And how can they book tickets?
They can just contact me through, through my Facebook, or coming to the Paranormal Dimensions page I've set up.
What's the name of the page? Do you know?
Yeah, the Paranormal Dimensions.
It's named after his shows, after his show, Paranormal Dimension.
Yeah,
Or if anybody needs to find David, can't find David, contact us at info@paukradio.com.
There's also
And
Colonel
we'll
Holt
pass your
page.
messages on.
Yeah, there's also a Colonel Holt Returns to Woodbridge page, which I've set up as well. So, so if you put in Colonel Holt on Facebook, you should find it.
Okay.
Okay, good stuff. I am going back to Newcastle in August. That'll be August the 10th. I've been asked to do another talk there, and that's for Truth Seekers North East. And I will be talking on aliens on the moon. If you want to find out more about that, if you go to, I think you'd have to join the group on Truth Seekers Northeast on Facebook just to find out more about it for people living in the area. That's the north of England. And so I'll be doing a talk there, Aliens on the Moon. I think it's £5 entry for individuals, and you can pay on the day, literally just pay on the day. And I believe it'll probably be taking place in the afternoon, maybe between 1 and 4 p.m.
That sounds good. I might even have to get you on my show, Neil.
No problem at all, David. Be happy to.
Right, so anybody that's got any questions for David or Neil about either these conferences or appearing on their radio shows, which is part of the Paranormal UK radio network, contact us at PAUK, Sugar Plum Fairies, info at paukradio.com. Email us and we'll put you in touch with them. Okay?
Lovely, thank you.
And how are we doing for time now, boys?
It is
11 o'clock.
Well, it's 11 o'clock. So
11 o'clock at night. Look at that.
we're pretty much there.
Are we hitting it on time or are we still off?
We're actually just slightly over.
Slightly over. Okay, people. Well, I'd like to thank my guests, or my hosts, should I say, Neil Geddies Ward, David Young,
Thank you.
and obviously my co-host, Christian Delaney.
Thank you all.
And we will be, I think, Jason I can't pronounce your, sorry, Jason, I can't pronounce your name. I'm going to have trouble next week. OFFUT, I believe it is, or OFUTT, talking with us next week on crypto creatures.
Oh, well.
Yeah, on the Paranormal UK radio network that can be found just about everywhere, people. TalkStream Live, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, the Paranormal UK radio network .com. Okay, bye, people.
Bye, everyone.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.